Welcome to the Rediscovery channel. This is the channel where every week I, Ivor Kovac, and my good friend Stilgar take turns coming up with topics from history that the other person doesn't know about and quite often hasn't heard about either. So today I have a topic that's perhaps rather abstract. I want to talk about the medieval mythology, like medieval European folk beliefs and mythology. So we talked about this a little bit with the Prester John myth, if you recall.
Yeah, it's
But
actually a very popular video.
yeah, surprisingly so.
Well,
And
it's a cool topic. Yeah.
yeah, like a lot of people, when they think about mythology and even European mythology, they're going to be thinking about stuff like the Greeks
Yeah.
and
Maybe
and
the Norse gods. That's about it.
yeah, the Norse gods, and if you're lucky, maybe like Irish and Slavic.
Yeah, some Celtic stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
But in fact, during the Middle Ages, there was a very kind of complete mythology that was in place. And of course, back when during that time, it wasn't considered mythology. It was just considered to be science and fact and history. But it's actually, like, looking at it in retrospect, it's actually kind of like the world that Tolkien created, like a complete fantasy world. So, any rate, let's get into it. So, when it comes to the medieval mythology or the medieval European mythology, there's a few different sources of these beliefs. It doesn't all come from one place. So, some of the things were holdovers from Greek and Roman mythology that just continued to be believed in up into medieval times. And then you had older historical accounts like the writings of Herodotus and Pliny the Elder. And Herodotus, of course, is considered to be the first historian because he was very objective and he would only say something is a fact if he knew it to be a fact. But he also reported rumors. And he would say stuff like, well, these people told me this, but I haven't seen it myself. And when you come to medieval times, though, those rumors just became to be considered facts. And then you also had influence from the Greek and Roman cosmology and distorted or incorrect interpretations of the Bible, like things in the Bible being interpreted wrong, and then those wrong interpretations being taken as fact. And then finally, the final source of all this stuff was distant rumors from other lands, because um, as you know, like during the medieval times, if we wanted to go out of Europe and say find out more about Africa, for example, there'd be no way we could do it because we didn't have the technology to safely go by ship and other than that, we would have to go through Muslim territory, which would be a one-way trip, right? Like maybe you could make it there, but you're not going to make it back.
Yeah.
So that's what contributed to a lot of this stuff. So
Well, it was
the
a lot
first,
harder to fact check back in the day, I guess.
yeah, there's no internet either, and and
You can't just fly someplace and check it out for yourself. Yeah.
right. And it also doesn't help that the Catholic Church was contributing to this stuff, and some of this stuff they had made as part of their canon. So if you disagreed too strongly with some of this stuff, you might be considered a heretic. And there's all sorts of problems that go along with that. But we talked about, to start off with, cosmology. So the medieval scholars knew that the world was round. They did know that. That was worked out actually in the ancient times before the Roman Empire even got started. But they did not know like the shape of the continents. So the maps that they drew were pretty inaccurate. And Earth is, of course, I'll put pictures of this stuff in the slideshow. But they did have a geocentric cosmology with Earth being in the center of the universe. And they believed that Earth consisted of four elements in various combinations. And those were wind, water, fire, and earth. Like the dirt that you walk on, not the planet. So in that way, I guess it's kind of like the Avatar series, you know, where you have wind, water, fire, and earth. And then there was a fifth element called aether, and aether is what composed the heavenly bodies, which all circled around the earth. So they thought that the universe, like the earth is in the center of the universe, and then it's surrounded by concentric spheres made out of aether, and that's what contains the planets and stars and causes them to move. So I have a quote here from this book, and there'll be a link to it below, but it's called The Sphere of Sacrabosso by Johannes de Sacrabosso. And this is actually kind of a scientific article for back in the day, but today reading it, it's kind of like fantasy. So here's what he says. The four elements. The machine of the universe is divided into two, the ethereal and the elementary region. The elementary region, existing subject to continual alteration, is divided into four, for there is earth, placed as it were in the center, in the middle of all, about which is water, about water air, about air fire, which is pure and not turbid there, and reaches to the sphere of the moon. As Aristotle says in his book Meteorology, for so God the glorious and sublime disposed, and these are called the four elements, which are in turn by themselves altered, corrupted, and regenerated. The elements are also simple bodies, which cannot be subdivided into parts of diverse forms, and from whose commixture are produced various species of generated things. Three of them in turn surround the earth on all sides spherically, except insofar as the dry land stays the sea's tide to protect the life of animate beings. All too are mobile except earth, which as the center of the world by its weight in every direction, equally avoiding the great motion of the extremes, as a round body occupies the middle of a sphere. So I guess he didn't believe in hollow earth either. And then what he says about, so about the heavens, he says, around the elementary region revolves with continuous circular motion the ethereal, which is lucid and immune from all variation in its immutable essence, and it is called fifth essence by the philosophers, of which there are 9 spheres, as we just said, namely of the moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, the fixed stars, and the last heaven. Each of these spheres encloses its inferior spherically. So each planet is, there's like concentric spheres going out from the Earth, I guess kind of like layers to an onion, and they're rotating at different speeds. And then there's a denser concentration of aether in each sphere, and that's what makes up the planet. And beyond the final sphere, where the stars are, the constellations, you have the end of the universe, and outside of that is the realm of God, which they call Empyrean. So I guess like they thought of the universe as being physically in God's hands. And if you read Dante, his third book in the Divine Comedy, the one about paradise, he actually visits the different planets and the moon. And I haven't, I'm ashamed to say I haven't read all of it. I've just read bits and pieces. And it looks like their idea was that these were smooth crystalline spheres which glowed with their own light and didn't have mountains or depressions or scratches or anything like that. And this was science. So if you question this stuff, you were considered to be ignorant and wrong, and also probably a heretic. Okay, so then coming to the geography of the Earth, and this is also, again, where the Catholic Church comes in. They would have these maps called Mapi Mundi, which means world map, where they would attempt to place everything that they knew of in the world in relative context and geography. So you would find these things hanging in churches quite often, and there would be different types of creatures drawn on them in different regions of the world, monsters, creatures, and such. And like there's a really famous one which I'll put a picture of in the slideshow called the Hereford Mappy Mundi, which is pretty detailed, and it shows a lot of the monsters, creatures, and the mysterious regions of the earth. And one thing about the medieval maps is they would always have it be running from east to west. So east would be at the top of the page and west at the bottom. And the reason they did that is because they believed that paradise was in the east, like the Garden of Eden that Adam and Eve got kicked out of. Um, they thought that was somewhere in the far east, so they would put it at the top of the map. And then Jerusalem is always shown as being in the center of the world because it's considered to be the most important city. So I have a quote here from Sir John Mandeville, which is from the Book of Marvels and Travels, which I use pretty heavily. I know I'm getting ready to use it again. So he says, "He who was the king of glory and joy chose that place as the best in which to suffer death, because if one wants something to be known by everybody, one shouts out in the middle of a city or town, so that all parts of the city know what is happening. Therefore, he who was king of all the world chose to suffer death at Jerusalem, because that is in the middle of the world. So it was known to everybody in all parts of the world at what price he redeemed mankind, which he made in his own likeness out of his immense love for us." So one way I guess there's some truth in that, because if you look at where Jerusalem is, from there you can get to Europe, to Africa, and to Asia. It's about equidistant from them all. But of course, in real life, the equator is in the middle of the world. But again, this is before the age of exploration, so they don't really have a good and comprehensive world map, and they just took it for granted that Jerusalem was right in the middle. And you may have noticed before, have you seen like the medieval, there'll be pictures of medieval kings, and a lot of times they're holding this ball in their hand. Have you seen that before?
No.
You haven't seen that, you haven't seen those pictures of the kings with the balls in their hands?
Oh, yes, actually, yeah. I just couldn't think of a concrete example, but yes, I have seen those.
You can actually still see those balls in museums on display, like the British crown jewels. They have one of those balls included, and also the Swedish, and probably more than that, but those are the two images that I found. And basically, that ball is supposed to represent the Earth, and they divided the Earth into three parts: Europe, Africa, and Asia. And Asia takes up half of it, and Europe and Africa, respectively, each take up a fourth. So that's represented as like one band going around the middle, and then another band going halfway around one side. And I'll put pictures of that. So other parts of the world were thought to be full of different monsters and creatures, but and I'll talk about some of those. But first, I want to mention paradise, because I have another quote here from Sir John Mandeville, who talks about how paradise looks. And usually paradise on the maps, it'll be depicted as near the top as an enclosed area, sometimes a circular area with some kind of wall around it. And they may show like a tree with a snake wound around it, or like a representation of Adam and Eve, like all that kind of stuff. So again, what Mandeville says is, let's see here. The desert and land of darkness lasts all the way to the earthly paradise where Adam and Eve were placed. They were only there a little while. It is to the east, at the very beginning of the world. However, it's not our east, the one where the sun rises for us, because when the sun rises in this region, it's actually midnight in our country, on account of the roundness of the earth. Indeed, our Lord made the earth entirely spherical in the in the middle of the firmament, as I've previously explained. I can't really describe paradise properly because I haven't been there, and that grieves me. However, I'll describe what I've heard from wise men. People say that the earthly paradise is the highest region in the whole world, and it is so high that it nearly touches the sphere of the moon. So high that Noah's flood, which covered all the surrounding land, couldn't touch it. Paradise is entirely enclosed by a wall. People don't know what this wall is made from. The whole wall is overgrown with something like moss, so people can't see the stone or whatever else it is made from. The highest place in paradise, in the very middle, is a spring discharging 4 rivers that run through different lands. The first river is called the Faison, or Ganges, and that runs through India. There are many precious gems in that river, plenty of wood from the tree called lignum aloes, and much gold. Oh, and much gold sand. Another river is called the Nile, or Gihon, and that runs through Ethiopia and Egypt. The third river is called the Tigris, and that runs through Asia and Greater Armenia. The fourth river is called the Euphrates, and that runs through Media, Armenia, and Persia. So, if you recall in Genesis, where it talks about the location of the Garden of Eden, it mentions 4 rivers. The Tigris and Euphrates, but then also the Faison and the river Gihon. And today there are some rivers there's a river called Tigris and another one called the Euphrates. They're over in Iraq. However, there's no river called Faison or Gihon. And what, back when all this was being kind of thought up, they knew about the Tigris and Euphrates and just assumed, oh yeah, that must be the rivers that are being talked about in Genesis. So then these other rivers, they're probably actually the Faison and the Gihon. But in fact, and of course, not everybody that listens to our channel believes in the Bible, but the flood would have resurfaced the earth entirely. So whatever rivers there might have been before the flood certainly wouldn't be there after the flood. And probably the Tigris and Euphrates are just names were just names that were reused after the flood. Kind of like how there's a Rome, Georgia, but it's not really Rome. It's just named after that, if you get what I mean. So, but you'll see this on the Mappy Mundis, where they have these rivers coming out of paradise in the east. Okay, so now what I want to do is talk about Africa and the kind of beliefs that surrounded that place. So Africa, the closest level of familiarity that our ancestors had was with North Africa, where they often depicted the people there as looking similar to Europeans. So there wasn't really a lot of awareness and interaction. But as far as most people knew, that's what the majority of people in Africa were, that were the North African population. And then the regions further south were pretty mysterious. And again, during Roman times, it would be harder to go further south because of the climate, the desert, and then also the hostility of some of the groups to the south of Egypt. But then when Islam took over this area, you have no chance to really go down there and explore. So the term Ethiopia, today there's a country called Ethiopia. And the Bible also makes mention of a place called Ethiopia. But that place is not the country of Ethiopia which exists today. Back in the day, Ethiopia was used as a catch-all term for the known part of Black Africa, like the only part that they knew where Black Africans lived. And the rest of the continent they think is full of monsters and dangerous animals. So Ethiopia, the ancient term, it also corresponds roughly with the Upper Nile region. That is supposedly the southernmost country inhabited by normal humans. And Sir John Mandeville, again, I'm going to quote from him. So what he says is, on the other side of Chaldea to the south is Ethiopia, a vast country. The people in the south of this country are utterly black. In the south is a spring from which during the day the water is so cold that nobody can drink it, whilst at night it is so hot that nobody can bear to touch it. In this country there are rivers, and all the water is murky and a bit salty because of the immense heat. People from that country get drunk easily and have little appetite for food. They often have dysentery, and they don't live long. In Ethiopia, there are people who have only 1 foot and get about so quickly on it that it's a wonder to behold. It's a large foot which can provide shade and cover the entire body from the sun. Also in Ethiopia is the city of Saba, and one of the 3 kings who made an offering to our Lord at Bethlehem reigned there. So those guys with 1 foot, they're actually called sciapodes. And according to the myth, the folk belief, they would lie on their backs and raise this foot over their heads, and it would serve as like a umbrella to protect them from the bright sunlight so they could sleep during the day if they wanted to. And in fact, the name sciapode actually means shade foot. And these guys are mentioned by Pliny the Elder in his Natural History. He wrote a book called Natural History, which includes a mixture of real creatures as well as made-up creatures. So, any questions on that or so far?
No, sounds pretty clear.
Okay,
Makes
so
sense.
then,
I'm thinking of this movie, The Croods, that I recently watched with my kids. Anyway,
they have 1-footed things in that movie.
well, they have like land sharks and all kinds of, wolf spiders, which are literally like spiders that are wolves. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's always it's possible that some of these things actually do reappear later on in entertainment that comes in later ages. So, and I'm going to give some more examples. Like you've heard of pygmies before, right?
They're tiny. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually a tribe of short people in Africa. They live in the jungle region. But those people are named after mythical creatures that were thought to live in Africa. And the word pygmy comes from the Greek word pygmaioi. And according to the myth, the pygmies were a miniature humanoid species that were thought to live in Africa south of Ethiopia. And the first appearance of them in anything in literature was actually the Iliad, written by Homer. And what he says about them is that they live south of Ethiopia near the coast of the great river Oceanus. And Oceanus is obviously where our word ocean comes from. And the Greeks used to think that it circled around all the lands like a great river. So these pygmies live on the southern coast of this Africa, the mythical version of Africa, I should say. And Aristotle, he believed that the pygmies were real, and he put them in his book. He mentioned them in his book, The History of Animals. So Aristotle said, in some cases they migrate from. Okay, this is a reference to the bird. Sorry. In some cases they migrate from places near at hand. In others, they may be said to come from the ends of the world, as in the case of the crane. For these birds migrate from the steppes of Scythia to the marshlands south of Egypt, where the Nile has its source. And it is here, by the way, that they are said to fight with the Pygmies. And the story is not fabulous, but there is in reality a race of dwarvish men, and the horses are little in proportion, and the men live in caves underground. So, does it sound familiar yet? You may. Did you watch You saw any of the Mummy movies with Brendan Fraser?
Yeah, I've seen them. Yeah.
Do you remember those disgusting little small mummy things that they fought that were like miniature sized?
I don't, but I haven't seen those movies in a while. But
Yeah. Well, that's based off of this legend because if
okay.
you were like if anybody who's seen that movie, like the second Mummy movie where they go south of Egypt and there's this jungle and they encounter these like small uh, mummies, like the size of babies, something like that. Um, and they get attacked by them. That is inspired by this legend of pygmies, and they were thought to live, south of Egypt, way to the south, actually, like south of the source of the Nile River. So, again, they're appearing over in entertainment over again, after people have long stopped to believe in it. So, Sir John Mandeville, he also has something to say about pygmies. And he actually places them in Asia, not in Africa. But what he says is
Well,
the
there
river.
are pygmy people in Asia as well, actually.
Yeah, but they're not as small as the fictitious creatures like.
Yeah, no, but it's similar to the African ones you think of. There are also pygmy tribes in, I think, Southeast Asia. Yeah.
Yeah, the African pygmies, of course, were named after the mythological pygmies once they were encountered by Europeans, but they have their own names for themselves. Like, I think there's actually more than one tribe. They're a multi-ethnic group, but yeah, that's not the name that they have for themselves. And I think, when I first started reading about this stuff, I thought maybe the rumor of the pygmies had gone all the way to Europe, and that's why people are coming up with all this stuff. But it looks like they were just whimsically made up by Homer, and then after that taken as a fact. So, and then of course the real people were named after it. But what Mandeville says is the river goes through Pygmy land, where the men are small of stature, being only 3 spans high, and they are truly attractive. They get married when they are 6 months old, and they live for 8 years. And one who lives for 8 years is considered to be really old. These little people don't work, but they keep big people like us amongst them to work for them, and they hold these people in such scorn as we would if we had giants among us. So it's like over time, more and more keeps getting added to this myth, basically. Um, and then the next monster that I want to mention, is supposedly living in Africa, is called the Anthropophagus, which is from the Greek word androphagoi, and it just means man-eater. And this thing is depicted as a humanoid character with nothing visible out of the or nothing visibly out of the ordinary, except that it eats people, and it's considered not to be human, but some kind of monster. And they usually are depicted as naked, and even though they're thought to live in Africa, they're depicted as Caucasoid and with light skin, physically indistinguishable from Europeans. So, during the Middle Ages, today there's a tendency when they do so-called historical movies to kind of project 21st century demographics onto the past, like on the medieval setting. But in the actual medieval Europe, most people lived and died without having ever seen an actual black person. Like they had no idea.
Yeah.
And in all my searching, I had, because I mean, you wouldn't see one because you'd have to go through the Muslim territories, or if they wanted to visit us, they would have to go through the Muslim territories, and you're not going to go through there. Like you can go there, but you're not going to get out the other side. So
Apparently, Pygmy children were sold, captured by fellow Africans, and then sold as slaves to zoos in like Europe and US and places like that,
yeah, there's
where they'd
actually
have one like with like chimps and stuff, and they'd have like a pygmy kid. And apparently, I'm reading up on pygmies as you're talking. They also live in current day Congo. They make up about 2% of the population, and many live as slaves to Bantu masters. And basically, the pygmy slaves belong to the Bantu masters from birth, and they do most of the hunting, fishing, and manual labor, and then the pygmies are usually only paid on a whim, like in cigarettes, used clothing, or not at all. So
that almost kind of sounds like Sir John Mandeville's description of them, except in the reverse, where the big
in the
people,
reverse, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
And
sorry, I'll let you get back to it. Yeah.
No, that's fine. Actually, I do have some topics about Africa planned, stuff that's like I have a lot
Okay.
of stuff in my queue that I'm going to get to. But yeah, Bantu is actually one of the main source groups for Africa for most of them, and the majority of Black Americans are descended from Bantu. And the Pygmies, you know, the number that you gave sounds kind of small, but I would
That's
bet
only in the Republic of the Congo, so it's just one place. Yeah.
I imagine there's no accurate survey that's really been done about on the Pygmies. I bet like their numbers are a lot higher than what's being reported.
Sounds like they're being exploited and discriminated against, though, across Africa. So, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of that happens, and slavery still is going on there, and I do want to talk about some of that stuff, but yeah, we'll come to that later, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, but good point. You know, it's interesting. And then, so the next monster that lives in Africa is called the Blimmies. And this monster is a humanoid, except that he has no head. And the face, like the eyes, the nose, and the mouth are all on the chest. So the name Blimmies that is taken from an actual people group that did exist. And they were one of those groups that lived to the south of Egypt when Egypt was still a Roman province, and they were a nuisance to the Romans in the 3rd century AD. And Herodotus, at an earlier time, he had made mention of a group of headless people in Africa, and he called them akephaloi, which means like headless men. And they reported that supposedly, you know, they lived in Herodotus, of course, is reporting a rumor, but they lived in eastern Ethiopia. And so Pliny the Elder, though, when he writes his stuff, he just puts it down like it's a fact. And then during the medieval times, everybody just takes it for granted as these people actually exist. But Pliny the Elder, he associates the akephaloi with the Blimmies. So even though the Blimmies were a real people group at some point in time, today, as far as anybody knows, you know, most people associate them with these headless monsters. At least people who even know about this mythology at all, I should say. So the real Blimmies are even less well known than the mythological Blimmies.
Did they have necks, the mythological ones?
No, they have no necks, and they also have pasty light skin.
Interesting.
So yes, they portrayed most of these creatures as, and I found pictures of all this stuff, so you'll be able to see for yourself. It is interesting. It's like at least as complete a fantasy universe as like World of Warcraft or
Yeah.
Elder
It sounds like
Scrolls.
that's what I was thinking. Some kind of video game. Yeah.
Yeah, somebody
Yeah.
could make a good RPG set in this environment. Actually, I'd play that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So the Blimmies, what happens is rumors, you know, as time goes on, this myth actually persists well up into the age of exploration. And even when the Americas are being discovered and explored, there's still people saying that Blimmies are real and thinking that maybe the Blimmies exist in North America or South America, including the great Turkish map maker Piri Reis. He thought that there were Blimmies living in the Americas. So actually, when it comes to the Blimmies, Muslims were also believing in those things too, for whatever reason. I don't know.
They probably had the same old Greek text. They were
Y-
reading. Yeah.
Yeah, they did absorb a lot of the Greek and Roman texts when they took over North Africa, right? At least those that didn't get burned.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so then I want to talk about the Asian monsters and creatures. So again, like in the Mappy Mundi, Asia is thought to be the biggest realm and also the most important realm because that's where like paradise is, and that's where the most of the biblical events occur, and also where the realm of Prester John is. So there's a monster there called Synaptocephaly, and that comes from the Greek word kinocephaloi, which means dog-headed. It's dog-headed men, guys, with a humanoid body, but then a dog's head on top.
Cool.
So yeah, see, that's kind of like Elder Scrolls, except in Elder Scrolls they have the
It's
Khajiit.
cats. Yeah.
I don't like cats, so I never created a Khajiit character. But I think it'd be cool if they could have put the Synaptocephaly in there. I'd play as that. So the earliest mention of Synaptocephaly in literature comes from a Greek geographer named Megasthenes. And Megasthenes was sent as an ambassador to India in 303 BC. And he supposedly heard of the Synaptocephaly from the Brahmins, who he took to be wise men. And supposedly what happened is he was interviewing the Brahmins, and he just took everything they said literally. And he was hearing about some mythical creatures and stuff, probably about different lokas, the other worlds of Hinduism, and just took it all to be literal, like, oh, other regions of India. Oh, okay, these dog-headed things live here. But I am a bit familiar with the Indian mythology as well, and I don't know of any dog-headed men in the Hindu cosmology or mythology. I know there's the closest thing that I can think of is this guy called Tumburu, who's got he's like the master of music or something like that, like the supreme musician in Hindu mythology, and he has a head which at first I thought was maybe a dog head, but as I look at more pictures, it looks more like a horse head. So that could be, I mean, it could be there's something I don't know about. I'll have to find out about this more. But basically, that's where.
Maybe the Brahmin just had really ugly wives.
That's harsh, man.
Yeah. Sorry.
Well, actually, during the medieval ages, synecrocephaly is also used as an insulting term as well as, like a boogeyman. It's also a way to insult people. Like sometimes Vikings are referred to as synecrocephaly because a lot of people hated the Vikings, for all the looting and pillaging and such. And also the fact that they were late adopters of Christianity, they were viewed as more barbaric. But I got a description of the Synaptocephaly here, again from Sir John Mandeville. And what he says is, of course, they live near India. And what he says is, from this land, one travels to another island called Natumiran, a large and pleasant island. Men and women from this island have dogs' heads, and they are intelligent. They worship the ox as their god. They go about stark naked, except for a little cloth in front of their private parts. They are good at fighting, and they carry a large shield with which to cover their bodies and a spear in their hand. If they capture a man during battle, they send him to their king, who is very powerful and devout in his religion, in that he has a necklace with 300 giant shiny pearls like an amber paternoster. Just like we say our Paternoster and Ave Maria, the king says 300 prayers every day to his God before he eats. He also carries around his neck an excellent and gracious shining ruby, which is almost a good and 5 fingers long, good 5 fingers long. When they elected him king, they gave him that ruby to carry in his hand. And in this way, he rides around the city, He also carries this ruby around his neck because if he didn't carry it, he would no longer be regarded as king. The great Khan of Cathay has long coveted that ruby, but he still can't have it, either through waging war or for the exchange of goods. This king is a very faithful and righteous man, as people can travel safely and securely throughout his land, carrying anything they wish, and no one would be so insolent as to menace or rob another. So, and I actually found a picture of this too. Now it shows this king and his red jewel and all the everything I described there. It's pretty cool.
Sounds like a cool dude.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he's a dog, so he's going to be loyal, right?
Yeah, loyal friend. It's like the ultimate romance. Anyway.
So this Synaptocephaly is another myth that lasts for a very long time past the Middle Ages. And of course, as you know, our ancestors explored more of the world, they realized, okay, there's no Synaptocephaly here. So I guess they're further to the east. And eventually, like even up to the time when the Americas were being explored, people thought maybe there's Synaptocephaly in the Americas. And there's actually one depiction of some Caribbean island, and they show Synaptocephaly eating people there, like cutting them up and eating them like animals. And that is a depiction, you know, from much later, I think 1600s or 1500s, something like that. So it took a while for this rumor to die, and of course, you know, we still see all sorts of anthropomorphical depictions, you know, being used today, especially in stuff for kids. You know, like there's series, you know, with anthropomorphs and all this kind of stuff, dog-headed people, and so on. And then another culture that lived in the East is Amazons, and these were thought to just be a tribe of women that had eliminated all their men. And because I did a separate video on them, I'm not going to really spend much time talking about them here. But if anybody, you know, and I'm going to show how old I am, and you as well. But if anybody recalls the old Hercules series with Kevin Sorbo, where they encounter the Amazons, and the Amazons basically in the series, they will use men as a way to get pregnant, but then they throw them back out after that, and they don't really form marriages with them. And if the baby is a girl, they keep it. If it's a boy, they send it away with the men. So the way that they depicted Amazons in that Hercules series with Kevin Sorbo is pretty much very similar to the way that Sir John Mandeville described them and the way that they were thought about in the Middle Ages. And if anybody wants the long, detailed stuff about the Amazons and where that rumor came from, we got another video about it. So you can just scroll down and get all the details on that. And then finally, the last thing I want to talk about is the realm of Prester John. And again, I've done a video on the realm of Prester John where I go into more detail. So I'm not going to spend too long of time talking about it, but there is some additional details that I want to discuss. So if anybody is hearing about the realm of Prester John for the first time, it was believed to be in India. And Prester John was a Christian emperor who ruled over India, and he had kings that were his vassals that would also perform service for him at his court. So he was a king of kings. And this realm is full of jewels and gemstones and all sorts of diverse creatures and, you know, miraculous things. And according to this rumor was started by a letter which emerged during the Middle Ages. And I believe this letter was actually used to kind of motivate people to go on the Crusades, but also to give comfort to medieval Europeans who were a lot of times black-pilled because of how they were getting overrun by Muslims and Tatars and such. So according to the letter of Prester John, this realm is full of jewels and gemstones, and no one is poor, and there's no oppression, and there's no greed. And I'm going to read a few pieces of the letter here, not the whole thing, but it says, in our country are born animals, elephants, dromedaries, camels, hippopotami, crocodiles, metagallinari, carnitae neri, auncerte, oh my goodness, auncerte, pantherae, onagri, white and red lions, white bears, white owls, silent grasshoppers, griffins, tigers, ogresses, hyenas, wild buffaloes, sagittary, wild men, men with horns, corneti, coreri, satyrs, and women of the same race, pygmies, Synaptocephaly, giants, 40 cubits in height, one-eyed men, cyclopes, the bird that is called phoenix, and almost all the kinds of animals under heaven. And then there's one other animal that's both a real life creature and a mythical creature, and that's called a salamander. So I bet you didn't know that salamanders used to be viewed as supernatural creatures. But yeah, it's true. So what it says about that is, in another kingdom of ours, beyond the place where the island lies, there are worms called in our tongue salamander, and these worms can live only in fire, and they have around them skins like the skins of worms that make silk. And to spin this is the work of our ladies in our palace, and thereof is made all kinds of apparel for the use of our majesty. And these clothes cannot be washed save in a large and strong fire.
So the salamanders live in fire.
According to the letter of Prester John.
That's interesting, because in Frozen 2, which has a stupid story if you ask me, but I've seen the movie many times because of kids. Yeah, the fire spirit is a salamander. So that's interesting.
That's right. And there was some talk during the Middle Ages in different parts of Europe of salamanders being composed of fire or having their origins from the element of fire. And they were thought to eat fire in some cases. So there's all sorts of mystical attributes that are surrounding them. And then and actually, I don't know. Have you read Chronicles of Narnia?
I've seen the movies. Didn't read the books.
The movies. So when I was a kid, my mom read Chronicles of Narnia to me, and then as an adult, I read them myself. And again, and basically, what C.S. Lewis did when he made Narnia, he borrowed immensely and heavily from this medieval mythology. And a lot of these creatures are there. Like he's got fauns and satyrs, and at first I thought he borrowed from Greek mythology, but then he put other things in there that were not in Greek mythology, like salamanders are there living under the ground in Narnia in the lava and speaking from the fire. So yeah, he pretty much ripped most of his mystical creatures from this medieval cosmology, at least for when it came to populating Narnia. And then also in the realm of Prester John, there's 10 tribes of Jews. That's what the letter says. And of course, this is another thing that kind of starts from the Bible and maybe misunderstanding what it says there. But as you know, the kingdom of Israel, it's split. And in the south, it was Judah and I think Benjamin. I should know, but I can't remember completely. I think so. And then there were 10 tribes in the north, apart from the Levites, I guess, who were, kind of everywhere. But the Assyrians, much later after the kingdom split, they ransacked the northern kingdom of Israel, and they took out all those tribes. And then I think it's at the end of Second Kings where it says, they took them to dwell in these cities, and they dwell there to this day. And I don't know if some people, I've heard that these other tribes of Israel never came back, that they just went extinct and assimilated where they went. But I'm sure that they took that into account whenever they made this letter of Prester John. They figured, okay, what else can we put here that's cool? I know, this is where the 10 tribes of Israel are. So, and then the Amazons, there's also a tribe of Amazons that lives in this kingdom. And Mount Olympus is also there. So, like all the things that, all the cool stuff, you know, they kind of just assumed was in this realm. It actually, at the risk of being disrespectful, like don't take it as disrespectful, but honestly, the letter of Prester John sounds like something that a middle schooler would come up with, you know, where they just kind of put everything they like together in a story. Well, like, yeah.
Know your audience. Probably the people liked it at the time. It's like, oh, this sounds awesome.
It would have been awesome if it was true, right? Like that would have been very helpful to medieval Europe if those people had come, you know, and brought their giants and cyclopses and Amazons and Synaptocephaly and legions of human soldiers, you know. It would have been a great thing. But actually, in real life, when Europe was being overrun by Muslims in the East and the West, same thing was happening to India. It was also being overrun. So there wasn't really, and of course, I would say like in the Prester John video, there's more details on this, but the whole notion of there being this Christian kingdom in India probably started with the Indian Orthodox community that lives in the South, the Malayalam community. They have very old church there. And so, but that was founded by the Apostle Thomas. And this is probably a grossly distorted exaggeration of what was actually there in this church. But to be fair, those Indian Orthodox churches, they do look very nice and elaborate, and the priests are well dressed. I can say that. So I can see how kind of the rumor of this would get distorted into something huge. But anyways, that's all I got. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting story. It's a good viewpoint into the medieval mindset and mythology. And yeah, I think people should check out your other videos that you did on this topic as well. But yeah, no, I think it's definitely cool. It sounds like it's some cool movies and video games could still be made for using this kind of topics and inspiration. But yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, I actually do take some inspiration from this myself, which was one of the reasons that I looked into it. And C.S. Lewis, he took some inspiration from it, and to a lesser extent, it looks like J.R.R. Tolkien did as well. And actually, the truth is, I still didn't mention all the different creatures and myths. Like, there's quite a few creatures that I left out, but I didn't have time to put in everything. So maybe later on, at some point in time, if people are interested, we can do a part 2 and deal with all the creatures that I missed. And if anybody knows of a creature or a myth or something that you'd like us to investigate or give us some leads, then do leave a comment. We've had a few requests, and those requests are in the list of things to do. So yeah, if you leave us some input, there's a very good chance we'll respond. And that's it, I think.
All right, thanks.
Great.
And, hope